to we are on the top of the hour, and we're gonna start now the I-CBT Fridays. Everybody, welcome. Um, this has been a great space for clinicians to share experiences in the treatment of OCD with I-CBT. This is a weekly meeting that has been very supportive for clients to learn and to refine their skills in using I-CBT in the treatment of OCD. And our goal is for us to maintain fidelity to the I-CBT methods as it has been empirically supported. So thank you everyone for coming and for being here. I am Silvana Levine. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in New Jersey, and I provide evidence-based treatment for OCD and anxiety disorders. I am one of the co-facilitators for these discussions, along with Mary Hashborough and Margaret McCall. And today we have a special presentation on the agenda. Dr. Connie Salhany, Stephnie Thomas, and Stephanie Woodrow have prepared a presentation for us on scrupulosity. And the title is Faith Beyond Doubt, Treating Scrupulosity with I-CBT. Our presenters will address the use of I-CBT in scrupulosity, presentation of OCD, focusing on Protestantism, Catholicism, and Judaism, and they will make their effort to delineate I-CBT treatment applications across different faith traditions. Before we start, I would like to mention that we welcome all attendees' participation in today's discussion. We will ask that you post questions on the chat box, but you would also have an opportunity to raise questions using the raise hand option at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation will be posted on the I-CBT website, and it will be available for public viewing. Accordingly, I would like to remind everyone to please be mindful of protecting clients' confidentiality when posting questions and refrain from disclosing clients' specific information in active discussion at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Salhany to begin with the presentation. Thank you for doing this for us.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I just need one moment to get my slides going. I'm an old lady. It takes me a minute, and then I should be able to do this with no problem because I've been practicing. So I come to my current slides, and then I'm going to just do my presenter view. Okay, is that okay? Can you see all right? Oh, good. I did it right. Hey. Amazing. All right. So I'm really, really thrilled to be here. And a shout out to Dr. Frederick Ardema on his new book. So happy new book. And also, it is a great time in history because this is also the Catholic Year of Hope. It's a Jubilee year. And what better to say, a message of hope with a new book, with a Jubilee year, and a brand new year. I was particularly impressed by a little post that Dr. Ardema had put on the Facebook that I-CBT is for everyone and the inherent inclusivity of it. And I think that for all of the people that we serve, it's so important, and especially for people of faith, to know that this works for them. I usually start here with the image of God and reinforcing what they already know about the loving and compassionate God, and very importantly, who they are in relationship to him, which goes into the real self modules, etc. Why do I like working with people with scrupulosity? Well, I can tell you, it's the real self. It's module 11. It's who they are. I find them to be the most amazing group of people who just want to do good and who want to serve God. And that's really who they are. And it's a privilege to serve them. I had a lot of research on this, and I took it out in the interest of time, but one thing that I wanted to point out is that Chiarochi noted that the biggest challenge is engaging people with scrupulosity in treatment, and they may find the therapeutic procedures morally objectionable, like exposures to blasphemous thoughts. They may believe that the therapists are ignorant of their religious traditions, they're wary of proselytizing, and also that the IOCDF noted confusion about treatment, fear judgment, guilt, shame, lack of support. And all of these things, I think, are important to note because I-CBT offers another option. And the other option is that it can integrate and respect the client's religious beliefs. It's particularly beneficial for clients who find exposures too distressing or incompatible with their religious practices. There's no need to tolerate uncertainty, restoring trust and faith in God through grace. And it restores client use of positive religious coping. I-CBT helps them to maintain the sense of identity or the real self. And it helps them understand that the doubts don't come from nowhere. Treating people with scrupulosity, with I-CBT, actually helps people on their faith's journey by restoring their relationship with their faith and renewing the focus on the core tenets and improving mental well-being, enhancing spiritual growth, and helping them to live the lives they want to live, consistent with virtue, value, and personal meaning, improving productivity and relationships, and we can go on and on. It's way beyond the topic, the scope that I can present here about Catholic basics. So I suggest that people either come to our little group, which is free, open to our members, and also spiritual direction or resources. So our wonderful Carl here, who's mentored to all of us, gave me this information, which I found so important, that uncertainty is knowing that you don't know something. He calls it meta-ignorance, and the valence depends on the story. And affect is a consequence of the narrative. And this is very different than faith, which is rooted in grace and spiritual teachings, religious experiences, and personal relationship with God. Faith is a conscious decision to follow God. It's not an emotional response. And it helps with a sense of purpose, meaning, and direction. And the scripture speaks of a deep-seated assurance and conviction that comes from trusting God, even when you can't see the outcome. So it's going beyond this notion of tolerating uncertainty and helping to restore hope and confident expectation. So there is reasonable doubt in matters of faith. And here it's open to learning, often temporary, and it's constructive because it encourages formation, growth, reflection, surrender, trust, and deepens the relationship with God. So for me, there's so much to talk about. I think collectively we could go on for days about the treatment of scrupulosity, but something that was important in terms of being a game changer is thought fusion. So thought fusion, which is confusion between imagining a thought and having a thought with motivated intention. And we said that that's different than the ironic process, right? There's so much that our beautiful community offers, a very, very generous community. There's a beautiful video from Katie Marotte, and Dr. Fred Artema also speaks on that. And I encourage people to look at that. And here, I was very inspired by our wonderful Amanda, who maybe is here with us, when she gave a little presentation on an exercise about intention and desire. And having people just play this little game of thinking about what they desire, what they intend, what they don't desire, what they don't intend. And I was so inspired by this that I came up with another little exercise. And here, asking the person to imagine what it would be like to be a person in these situations. And we can do all kinds of situations, from romance to being a celebrity, maybe a tired celebrity, to robbing a bank, to having an infestation of bed bugs, or maybe even being an exterminator who hears about the infestation of bed bugs and is going to make a lot of money. And so people can think about what it might be like to be in that situation, what intentions, what desires they might have. And this is a very playful way of demonstrating thought fusion. But there's caution to this. It's more than just a bunch of exercises, right? So I-CBT is a wonderfully crafted therapy with various modules. And there's a kind of a layering effect working toward the resolution of the doubt. So wanted to look at some clinical cases here, and I'm going to do them kind of quickly. I'll share the slides with whomever might like them. But we're going to be looking at these, and this is a disclaimer. These are not based on any one patient, right? So it's kind of like a concoction of things. So here's Marianne. Now, you notice the purple. So folks who are familiar with I-CBT know the sequence well. But the purple is in Dr. Fred Artema's new book. So the changing of the words just a little bit. So in church, Marianne is praying, and she has the obsessional doubt. What if I want to blaspheme God? I might be a horrible person. I could die in a state of sin and go to hell. There's intense fear, guilt, confusion, even despair. And she ends up analyzing and reanalyzing, distraction, and even avoiding communion. And this is really, really cool. So we're used to the reasons, quote, behind the doubt. And I always struggled with it a little bit when it came to scrupulosity, because I had to kind of figure out where to put in matters of faith, and that could be hearsay or not. And in the new book, Dr. Artema works this out really, really nicely. So I think it works really well for scrupulosity. And sometimes when working with people, we find that there is a need to find out more. They may need to go back to the spiritual director, etc. But that's just to kind of clear up things, but the sequence is always the same. The sequence is always the same. It works so beautifully. So I really, really like this a lot. I'm going to share the obsessional narrative. So this is for Marianne. And what if I want to blaspheme God? It's Sunday morning. I'm in church, as I've been every Sunday morning since childhood. I arrive early with my family and take our usual pew. I look around, close my eyes, and try to pray. Inappropriate images of Jesus on the cross flood my mind. Thoughts of him being disrobed make my stomach turn. I want to run, but my family is there, and I don't want them to think I'm crazy. If I leave, I'm turning my back on God. I don't understand why I'm having these thoughts and wonder if I secretly want to blaspheme God. I know I'm supposed to reject these thoughts, but I can't stop them. So I fear I must desire them and wonder if I'm evil for having them. I'm not going to go on in the interest of time reading the rest, but I want to show you of course, the thought, the feared possible self. I might be an immoral or evil person. I have a lot to say on the feared possible self in this, but I'm going to keep it very, very simple here. And after working through the modules and coming up with the alternative story, you can see here there's comparative trust in the senses and the self, etc. So here, I desire to worship God and follow his commandments. I want to live a good life and help others do the same. I trust my true intentions in my actions toward my family and loved ones. And the same goes for my love for God. My true intentions and desires aren't the same as my imagination. It's like when I watch a movie or hear a story about someone doing something wrong. I can imagine it, but it doesn't reflect my true desires. Sometimes disturbing images make me feel like when somebody talks about lice or bed bugs, but it doesn't mean that it's truly happening in the present moment. God loves me, and I am his child. I desire to have a close relationship with him. He understands that I get confused sometimes, just like a child gets confused, but his love remains because he is the perfect Father. I know that I can put childlike trust in him. I know the desire and my intention to love him and to follow him. And when it's my turn, I go to communion. I know that I can rely on his grace and his love for me. So functional certainty allows her to trust the genuine desires and intentions to please God, grow in holiness, along with trust in his grace, the renewed understanding of herself as a beloved child of God, who's a loving and absolute Father. There's one more, I'm going to go through it real quickly, but this is Paula praying at night, and she's wondering, what if my prayer is wrong? And we have to ask, what does that mean, etc. It's unacceptable, offensive to God, and that she'll be punished, she'll go to hell, the rest. And she ends up mouthing words, redoing it, saying it again and again, and apologizing. Here's her sequence, her reasons behind the doubt. We just did the sequence. And now I'm going to just show you the feared possible self. Notice how this is different than the other. I might be a careless or irresponsible person. And here is her obsessional narrative. What if my prayer is wrong, unacceptable, or offensive? I worry that my prayers are wrong because I stumble on words when I speak. I might not say a word correctly. I could offend God. I try to mouth the words of my prayer correctly to ensure accuracy because I've heard it said that I need to be perfect as our Heavenly Father is perfect. I can't take a chance of offending him, so I go back over it and say it again and again until I can get it right, sometimes repeating it 3 times and apologizing. Exhausted, I fall asleep, still wondering and worried because it's possible that I have messed up and offended God. Right? So she goes on with that. And again, we can go through the modules. And here is the alternative story. I can trust that my prayer is acceptable without needing repetition or having to do it just right. I can trust that my Heavenly Father knows the desires of my heart. He accepts my offering of love, just as I lovingly accept the gift of my daughter's drawings, made with crayons and construction paper. It's not a Rembrandt, but it's important to me because it's from my child. Similarly, he accepts the prayers from his children. I begin with the sign of the cross and say the Our Father. I say each word, whether perfectly or imperfectly. The words are from me, a beloved child of the Father. And when I finish the prayer, I make the sign of the cross and I move to the kitchen where a sink full of dishes awaits me. I turn on the water and begin washing. And just the functional certainty here encourages her to trust that her prayers, made with a sincere heart, are always heard by God and do not need to be exhaustive or flawless to be effective. Okay, that's it. We're on to our next person.
Hi, everyone.
Stephanie.
I'm Stephnie Thomas, and let me share the slides that Stephanie and I are going to be sharing. And there we go. And we put it in presentation mode. There we go. All right, so this was fun to put together, and I am not a Canva expert, so sorry about that. Okay, Stephanie, how do I move to the next slide? There we go. I have to click on it. So, you know, one of the things that Fred has talked about and we've all talked about is OCD is OCD. But why are we focusing on religious scrupulosity? And it's because it can be tough to treat, often because it's so tied to the person's sense of self and their values. And so I wanted to focus more on the feared possible themes, possible self themes, because they're important to identify in this. And like Connie, I've made an amalgamation of many different clients to give you. And This is probably an amalgamation of about 5 or 6 different clients that I've treated over the years. So Jane is a 50-year-old female, well liked by her friends, but they're becoming concerned because she started to avoid attending church, prayer group, etc. And Jane is such a nice person, they all say, not knowing that Jane is really struggling with doubts around her faith. When Jane heard the pastor preach a message about loving others, she feels like such a failure because she finds it impossible to always feel positive about others. She's very good at pretending that everything is okay, even when others say hurtful things to her, however. She notices that the other church members are not as worried about following all the rules, and she feels tremendous guilt whenever she feels anger begin to show up. She doesn't even allow herself to get angry with God because, oh, that would be terrible too. So she prays repetitively and has some counting rituals. So here's one of her doubt sequences. So the trigger, the pastor says, be loving toward others. The doubt, what if I'm a bad Christian, if I get angry? Consequences are all of those. Emotions, there's a whole bunch of them. Compulsions, avoiding church, always being nice. Like this is the super nice people praying, seeking reassurance. But where is the doubt coming from? There's reasons for the doubt, but there's, for this particular one, there's an inference that she's making about those reasons, that good Christians are always nice. So in order to be a good Christian, she always has to be nice. And here's some of her reasons. Rules, got to be nice. Hearsay, I've heard others be judged for not being a good Christian, and haven't we all heard that over the last 6 months or so? Past experience, I'm not a good Christian because I got mad at my husband and he threatened to leave me. There's abstract facts, getting your heart right before God, before taking communion. And I struggled with this one, whether to put it under abstract facts or rules. I think it would be under, in Fred's new nomenclature, it would probably be under authority. And then I like the idea of possibility. I know Fred has it as anything else, which I think is another word for possibility. I may go to hell if I'm not nice to others. I'll get sick and die if I take communion while holding sin in my heart. I've actually had pastors preach that. So here's her OCD story. I can't be a real Christian unless I'm always nice to other people because the pastor told us we should always be Christ-like, which means I have to smile and be nice all the time, even if I'm feeling angry or upset. Good Christians are able to forgive others, so I have to be loving and forgiving all the time. I'm not allowed to be angry. That wouldn't be Christ-like. Sometimes, however, others say, how can that person be a Christian? Look at the way they're acting. I hardly go to church anymore because it's so hard to keep up with all the rules, and I feel like everyone is judging me for being such a bad person. Also, when I do attend church, I don't feel I can take communion because of all the bad thoughts I have. And you're only supposed to take communion if you don't have sin in your heart. Oh my gosh, so why bother going to church at all? So notice the avoidance. My husband got mad at me the other day because I kept asking him if I was going to hell. Now he might leave me. My kids tell me they don't want to go to church if it means following a bunch of stupid rules. I obviously wasn't a good mother. I pray and pray and pray that God will help me be more Christ-like, but I still get all these bad thoughts show up. I just want them to go away. So what's her feared possible self? I'm a really awful person because she's human, but she's discounting the fact that she's human. She also thinks that because she's sometimes angry, that means God has already condemned her to hell. And we'd kind of talk through that through module 4. And then we'd kind of be exploring these through all the different modules as we go through. And this is what I would be doing with a client like Jane. Notice that she discounts all the scriptures that talk about God's love, grace, and mercy, as well as the ones that specifically talk about how anger, anxiety, fear, etc., are all normal emotions. So she needs both some psychoed, that emotions are normal, and recognizing that emotions are in the Bible as well. Treatment included asking Jane to write out her OCD story, exploring the reasons why the doubt was so sticky, and then asking her to write the alternative story that acknowledged that anger is just one of many emotions and God loves her as she is. This quotes from Fred's book. You don't have to change your personality standards or values to overcome OCD. Religious group can seem egocentric. After all, the covert or overt behaviors align with values and morals. However, the lack of flexibility is what's key. And as you saw in the cases Connie presented, again, there's a lack of flexibility of understanding the balance of scripture. And Jane is applying her values in such a rigid way that there's no room for alternative stories that also align with her values and morals and religious beliefs, whatever they may be. And of course, the real self, and as Connie pointed out before, the irony is that Jane is actually a really nice person who's well liked, even though her friends would sometimes prefer she was able to be a little more real with them. And this is the comment I hear about clients like this who really struggle. So my ending message would be, when you get a client who's always super nice, and you've all probably had those clients, but you get the sense that underneath it all is a deep well of anger, it can be really helpful to explore their religious beliefs about emotions and anger in particular, even if the person is no longer attending a religious institution, no longer attending church, or might not actually identify themselves as being somebody of any particular faith, because those messages can get embedded really early on as children. All right, so now it is Stephanie's turn. Yay, go Stephanie.
Stephanie, you're muted. There you go.
Now I realized it. Hi everyone, I'm Stephnie Woodrow, and I am excited to talk about Judaism. Under the word Judaism here, in Hebrew it says Ha'am Hanivra, which is the chosen people. And if you're walking into Judaism already with that hanging over your head, the chosen ones, well, you better be getting it right. So there's this old adage, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And I've never had this experience. It's usually 2 Jews, 87 opinions. And there's a reason for that. So when we're looking at what is the authority, where are we getting this knowledge? Where are we getting information from? We run into a few things. So historically, we have the Torah, which is the written law, and then there's oral law, oral tradition, which is the Talmud, and then you have the ancient rabbis who did lots and lots of interpretation, and their word is very much considered important and followed. And then you have modern day where you have rabbinic councils that make decisions based on law. And then you have individual rabbis that also will interpret all of these components. So if we're just talking about the United States, for example, because it's a little different all over the world, there's 3 main sects of Judaism. So there's Orthodox, which is the most observant, conservative, and Reform. I grew up Reform, or as my dad would say, we weren't Reform Jews, we were deformed Jews, which was his joke. We were more culturally Jewish than anything else. In college, my rabbi was modern Orthodox, and I've kind of settled in, and I spent a lot of time in the Orthodox community, and now I've kind of settled in conservative Judaism. So I've hung out everywhere. The majority of patients that are Jewish patients that are going to have scrupulosity are going to be Orthodox patients, because the following of the law is where they're going to be running into struggles. So within Orthodox Judaism, though, you're going to have subsets. So the 2 main that you're going to have are Haredeh and the modern Orthodox. But then even within that, you're going to have additional subsets. So the one that most people have heard of is Chabad. So within these, the ways that you practice Judaism are different. Oh yeah, so then we also have to add in your heritage comes into play. So if you are an Ashkenazi Jew, as I am, my ethnicity comes from Eastern European. If you're Sephardic, then you're coming from Western Europe. If you're Mizrahi, then you're coming from Africa. And then you have different rules as well. So when you have all of these different authorities, it's no wonder people are running into problems of who do I listen to, who do I follow, who do I trust? So I wanted to just give a few examples of where Judaism and scrupulosity can run into issues. So on Sunday through Friday mornings, Orthodox men put on something called tefillin, which are these two boxes, and then there's leather straps that go along with it. One of the boxes has to go on the bicep of the arm, and then the leather strap is wrapped 3 times, and it has to be wrapped in the exact shape of the Hebrew letter shin, which kind of looks like a 3 like that. And then you have to wrap it 4 times down the forearm, and it's supposed to be tight enough that you can feel your blood pressure, but not tight enough that it's cutting it off. And then you wrap it around, and the knot has to be at the right spot at the base of the neck. And then the other box has to be in the middle of the forehead between the eyes, but it needs to be at the center between the eyes, but also at the base of the hairline. And we can see where somebody would very easily, especially if you've got symmetry, if you're worried about perfectionism, having all of those things exactly right, very easily you can run into issues. So a couple of examples of obsessional doubts is the arm box on my bicep. What if it's slightly off? What if it's, on a different part? Is the head box in the center of my eye? Did I get the shape of the shin correct? Did I wrap the straps tightly enough? Is the neck knot in the right place? So just a couple of examples. Kashrut, which is another word for kosher. There are so many laws that go along with kosher, but the one that we see people run into the most issues with is meat and dairy. And the original wording from the Torah is, thou shalt not boil a kid, meaning a goat, in its mother's milk. Fine. That's not how it's practiced, though, now. It's that not only can you not boil a kid in its mother's milk, but you can't eat meat and dairy at the same time. But then you also have rules about after you eat meat, you have to wait a certain number of hours before you eat dairy. Well, how many hours do you wait? Well, that depends on where you live and who you follow. It can be 1 hour in certain countries and 6 hours in another country. Okay. And then in many Orthodox households, you have 2 entirely different kitchens. So you have different plates to prevent cross-contamination. You have different sponges, you have different dishwashers. So again, these are all things to prevent cross-contamination. Next slide. So obviously, am I choosing the waiting period based on when I want to eat? So am I choosing 1 hour or am I choosing 6 hours? Do I just want to be able to eat what I want to eat, or is that the actual tradition I follow? For if you're using an oven or a microwave where it is sharing meat and dairy, did I clean it well enough, so that there isn't that cross-contamination? And then there's also this lovely tradition of Marit Ayin, which means like the appearance. So even if you're not actually breaking a law, if you're appearing to others like you're breaking a law, that still is a problem. So you could be eating a burger that has vegan cheese on it, but somebody else may not know it's vegan. So that can still be a problem. So am I breaking that rule? Shomer Nagia. I had never heard of this until I got into college, and the way that everyone referred to it is Shomer means observant of, and I learned it as Shomer no touchy. And what Shomer Nagia means is that men and women cannot touch each other other than immediate family in any way. So shaking hands, tapping on the shoulder, not allowed. And The reason is that it could spark some sexual desire, and you can get excited, and a handshake in a job interview can lead to sexual activity, apparently. So there are exceptions, though, and that's where you run into the issues. So one of the main exceptions is medical. So if you are a woman and you are Shomer Negia, you can see a male doctor and the male doctor can touch you. But wait, did I choose a male doctor because I wanted him to touch me, or did I go to a male doctor because he's the best one? You're also not responsible for accidents. So if you accidentally bump into something with somebody, you know, that's not breaking of Shomer Negia. But did I accidentally bump into them, or did I want to touch them? And another really common thing that comes up is switching seats on airplanes. So people observing Shomer Negia a lot of times will not want to sit next to somebody of another gender. And so they'll ask to switch seats. In some cases you can't. Okay, well, am I going along with not switching my seat because I do want to sit next to them? Like, where is my intention? Where is my desire? And then just a couple other that I'll throw out. Fasting, there's a lot of restrictions that go along with fasting, making sure that nothing passes through the lips. Tzedakah or charity, there's 8 different levels of charity, and the 8 levels are determined based on if you know the recipient, if you as the recipient know who gave it to you, and what was in your heart. Like, were you giving that donation with happiness in your heart and love, or were you doing it spitefully? Pikuach nefesh is the concept of saving a life. It's a huge, huge loophole in Judaism where you can break basically any Jewish law if you're saving a life. So that's something where people can run into issues. Havina is another one where people can really run into issues. And this, I think, really plays very well into module 7 of the bubble, because you can do any practice or any observance, but if you're not focused on it, if you're not present, if you're not intentional, you kind of don't get credit for it. You don't get your mitzvah points or your brownie points with God. Well, we know that one of the things that happens when people are in the bubble is they're so worried, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? Well, now you've missed the entire point entirely. And then body modification. You're not allowed to alter your body with the exception of circumcision or medical purposes. And I'm just going to throw it out there because people always ask, yes, you can be buried in any Jewish cemetery if you have a tattoo. No tattoos. Tattoos are not allowed in Jewish law. You can still be buried in any Jewish cemetery. Not a problem. So most common fear consequence is going to be disappointing God, but we also see a couple of other things. Disappointing parents, that's actually a very realistic consequence in Judaism. And then sometimes we see not being pure of heart, or being a fraud, or being a liar. The big thing that people can really, really get stuck on is the fact that there are loopholes literally written into Judaism. So there is a strict law, but here's how we get around it. So one example of that is women, once they're married, your hair is considered alluring. So once you're married, most women, Orthodox women, will cut their hair very short. Some will shave their heads. That's less common now, but some do. And then you wear a wig called a shadel, and your natural hair is saved for your husband. But the shadels are gorgeous. So what happens is, okay, I've saved my natural hair for my husband, so only he's allured by it. But I'm wearing an absolutely gorgeous shadel, and that's still alluring. So again, it's these loopholes, and we run into that. There are very strict days of when you're supposed to fast, but we have makeup days if you miss the fast days or you can't do that. One of my all-time favorites is for Passover, it's not just that you can't eat bread or chametz, you can't own it. So there's a tradition of you sell your chametz, which means you put it in a closet, and sometimes you'll put tape over it or something, and then you, on paper, sell it to somebody who's not Jewish. It never leaves your home, and they never come into your home to take it. And then after the 8 days of Passover, they sell it back to you. It never has left your home. There's no difference. It's just an official thing. So there literally are these loopholes written in. And one of the problems that will come up for Orthodox Jews is going, did I look for the loophole, or did the loophole always exist and I'm just going along with what my community already does and always has done? I think we're in the next. There's a really wonderful work called Letter and Spirit, Evasion, Avoidance, and Workarounds, and Halakha, which is a Jewish law system. And so the questions in terms of looking for loopholes is, does the action fulfill the letter of the law? Does it fit into the spirit? Because the spirit of the law is very important. It's not just following the exact letter. Is the action sincere? And is there sufficient need for the action? So those are some of the qualifying questions when you're looking at the loopholes. And then a couple of key points that are ICBT specific. Real stuff, and we talk about this with every OCD theme, but if a person's faith isn't important to them, they wouldn't be worried about doing it perfectly. In Judaism, there are 613 commandments. We don't just got 10, we got 613. None of them are to obey. There is not a single one to obey. And at the time, in ancient Hebrew, there actually was no word for obey. And the reason for that is because God wanted people to question and to think, and he gave people the ability to analyze and really think through things. He didn't just want people to blindly obey. So to hear, understand, internalize, and respond. We know in I-CBT that the knowing comes before the doubting. If anybody has been in the Orthodox community, which they are if they're coming to you at this point, they already know what the loopholes are, and they already know what the standard practices are in their community. So if they're going, well, am I looking for this? All right, well, what's already happening in your community? What's standard practice in your community? They know. They're just questioning after. OCD, the knowing always comes before the doubting. So did they know the loophole, or were they hunting for the loophole? And again, with OCD, they knew the loophole. They weren't hunting for it. One place that people are definitely going to get caught up is that asking questions in Judaism is very, very important, and it is considered standard practice. And when you are in yeshiva or Jewish school, the better questions you ask, the higher praise you get. Like, the best student isn't the one that has all the answers, it's the one that has the best questions. And so that could be really easy to slip into the going deep and let's discuss it. But one of the points that I think is really, really special and important is that the questioning is supposed to be of the law and of the practice and the history. It's not questioning of yourself and of your faith. So you're not supposed to be questioning yourself. You're supposed to be questioning the law and the meaning and the explanation of something. And that's a really, really important differentiation. The bubble, as I mentioned before, the mindset and intentions while carrying out the 613 commandments matter. And if the person is overly concerned about doing it properly, they're missing out on the intentional part, which matters. And selectivity of doubt, which we always talk about. If somebody is an observant Jew, they're observing laws all day, every day. How are they following the other laws? How are they choosing who they're following, which rabbis they're following, which traditions they're following? It's going to be pretty consistent. So why for this one are you running into issues? And my final takeaways are context matters, which is, a huge component of I-CBT, the here and now. So what's permissible in one situation, what's not permissible in one situation is going to be allowed in another. So we always have to come back to context in Judaism. If you're going to consult with a rabbi, that's fantastic, but you have to consult with a rabbi that is in alignment with the person's sect of Judaism, their practice, and their ethnic affiliation. So I'm conservative. I've disagreed before with modern Orthodox Sephardic rabbis. So if they tell me to do something, I'm going to be respectful, but I'm not going to listen to it, and I'm not going to trust that information. So if you're going to consult with a rabbi, make sure it's somebody that the patient actually trusts and is in alignment with who they are. And there are always, always, always going to be multiple opinions. So the patient has to trust ones that are based on their own internal beliefs, the community norms, and the official authorities within their sect. And then these are links that people will have access to when we put up the slides and everything, of where you can refer people to in terms of getting more details about specific laws, things like that.
And I would add a lot of what Stephanie just said can be said for the Protestant and Catholic faith traditions as well. If you have a client who is Catholic, they are not going to believe a Protestant pastor. And even within the Protestant faith, a Methodist is not going to believe somebody from a Pentecostal tradition. So finding a reliable resource within the faith tradition of your client is really important.
It's true. Also, as you were saying, Stephanie, in Catholicism, so, there's the traditionalists, that are super, I want to say some are radical in a way, they're referred that way, kind of going almost off, but traditionalists are certainly, fine. And then we have liberal, and then some have, again, veered away. So some people present as Catholic, but don't really follow the teachings. And then where does a person fall within that? So yeah, it can be very confusing.
And I think one of my rabbi in college, who's since passed, who was modern Orthodox, one of the greatest pieces of education he gave me is that there is a difference between religious and observant. Religious is your relationship with God. Observant is how you follow the letter of the law. So you can judge somebody, I'm not supposed to, but you can judge somebody else's level of observance. You can never judge their level of religiosity, because you can't judge somebody else's relationship with God. And that for me was one of the most wonderful teachings of pluralism that I got from Rabs.
Do we have any questions from anyone?
Yeah, thank you everyone for this wonderful presentation. It was a really learning experience of people of different faith. For me, it was actually very interesting to learn about how different religions can inform the obsessional doubt. I was curious to know if there is a scrupulosity in non-religious themes that we should discuss a little bit, how that can be presented. Obviously, religion is like the perfect broth for scrupulosity, but it would be interesting if we can take a couple of minutes, if we can discuss how a scrupulosity can present with non-religious themes in OCD, and if there's any difference in the way the doubt is informed as reasonable when it really isn't. I just wonder if anybody has any thoughts about that.
I think it's a fantastic topic for another I-CBT Friday presentation on moral and moral and ethical scrupulosity, because yes, 100% very true. And this presentation was very much about religious scrupulosity, but yes, moral scrup is very, very much a thing. And I would love to hear somebody in this community do a phenomenal presentation on it. And I'm not going to voluntold anybody that they should do it.
But would it actually change radically in relation to this? Or is the process the same? Are we making, is the inferential confusion what it really is the driver of the OCD when you're applying rules out of context facts and rules, not informing the real intention, right?
Well, I mean, in I-CBT, we're saying that the process is the same regardless. It's just the details that are the different. So when you're applying it to moral, the person has their morals coming from somewhere. It can be coming from societal norms. It can be coming from their family values and things like that. So those things are still going to come from somewhere. They still learned it from something. So, you know, whether we call it a religious authority or whether we call it your parental teachings or your community norms, it's still going to be inferential confusion, and I-CBT is still going to be a wonderful way, not the only way, but a wonderful way to treat and approach them.
That's why I really like those new reasoning categories. You know, I think it really covers it really, really super well. And I think you could see, you know, how these things, you know, all, you know, why the person, you know, develops those kinds of obsessive doubts, right? The other thing that I want to say is if you look at the literature, the naming of these things is confusing a little bit. So we look at like, what is religious, OCD, what is scrupulosity, what is spiritual, you know, OCD. So the spiritual looks more like existential, you know, depending on who writes it and what they are talking about, you know. But what I-CBT does, as Stephnie was saying so beautifully, is that, you know, it's always going to be the same. Isn't that cool for us, you know, to look at like the reasons behind the doubt? I mean, it's fantastic, you know.
And I always refer back to Dr. Ted Widzik, who's a pastor and a therapist who often presents at IOCDF. Ted says, what is 80% of your congregation doing? Those are the norms. People with scrupulosity take the norms and then add another layer to it. You know, usually you find the person with scrupulosity is wanting to do it 100%. And in moral scrup, I'm thinking, oh, I took a ballpoint pen from the office that somehow landed in my briefcase and came home with me. Oh my gosh, now I need to reimburse the office for the ballpoint pen. You know, that would be an example. Do people take pens home from the office all the time? Sure. Do most of us worry about it? No. What was the intent? It was accidental. And that goes back to Stephanie's presentation about what is the intent? You know,
I think also with the 80% rule that Ted has, which is so good in a lot of the cases, it doesn't work in every case. So again, it's about the individual. So the traditionalists won't accept it. So it, you know, again, it comes back to the person. And that's what, again, something that I really love about I-CBT. It's a very individualized look at people. And Fred said it so well in his opening statement for the new year, you know?
A number of years ago, I was at a Sephardic modern Orthodox synagogue, and the rabbi was talking about Passover, and he made the very, very dangerous question during Q&A of calling on me. And it was after he had said that if somebody who's Ashkenazi has Passover lunch at somebody who's Sephardic's house, you should eat the food, even if it's food that you're not allowed to eat during Passover. And so I raised my hand and I said, isn't that a slippery slope? And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, what's the reason you're eating it? And he goes, well, you don't want to embarrass somebody. You want to be considerate. And I said, what happens if I go over to my non-Jewish friend's house and they offer me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich during Passover? And he goes, oh, well, that's not the point. And I went, kind of is the point. And as somebody who's Ashkenazi, I'm not eating, you know, legumes and things that people who are Sephardic are eating. I'm not judging them. It's different traditions. And he was like, no, don't worry about it. I'm not going to listen to anything that rabbi said because it doesn't work for me. So that idea of tradition and who you follow, it really matters. It's not an insult for that rabbi. It's just, I'm not going to follow you.
Like I'm thinking that that is an interesting observation. How perfectionistic the person has to be in relation with how to apply a rule, right? Like the inflated value of the transgression is actually something that drives us towards perfectionism in very orthodox situations. And it drives, in this case, Stephanie, to not listen to certain rabbi and do listen to others. It depends on what degree of inflation there is in the doubt.
Well, I
Okay,
don't.
this is, yeah.
I think in my case, it didn't have anything to do with inflation. It had to do with what I believe in and my
Correct.
value system.
Right.
It had nothing to do with strict adherence. It had to do with, I thought that he was creating a loophole that I thought was kind of ridiculous and a very slippery slope. And I was being obnoxious with my example, as I tend to do. I know we only have a couple minutes and there's a couple questions.
Yes, I was about to. Yes, Mary, you would like to.
Oh, mine was just a comment, but I'll save it for another day when we're talking about moral scrup. We can move to other questions.
Yeah, Megan?
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. I'm curious if you have any really quick suggestions about working with clients who are able to acknowledge that they're not practicing their faith as the 80%, even get to a place of saying, like, I am overemphasizing one part of my faith tradition to the exclusion of others, but still just hold fast to that. That's where I've gotten with a couple of my clients, and it's been a real sticking point for us.
I think sometimes this is where it can be helpful to actually talk to a rabbi or a pastor of that faith tradition, because often they are less dogmatic. Now, I had that backfire on me once. I had a client who was told by her pastor if she had a bad thought, then she was sinning. And I checked in with him, and yep, that's exactly what he believed, that whatever you
Right.
thought was a bad thing. And so I had to find somebody of an adjacent tradition for her to talk to. But until she talked to a pastor, she wasn't going to accept it from me. I wasn't enough of an authority figure.
Or, I mean, in this case, the person had already talked with people and agreed. So that, I think that's part of why we got to the sticking point. No authority was enough, even though she recognized the discrepancy. So thank you so much again.
So if somebody is saying that one thing is a sticking point and they're willing to listen to a faith leader on all of these other points, but they're not willing to listen to it on a different point, what's the difference for them? And what would you need to hear? Because and when you're asking a faith leader, it's important that the faith leader knows that the person has OCD and scrupulosity specifically. That is really, really key. But how many faith leaders are you checking in with? Are you asking, 10 until you get the answer you want, which confirms that you're a bad person? So again, what do you need to hear, or what would you need them to say in order for you to trust them? And what is different for you in this case, where you're trusting them on all of these other topics, but you're not trusting them on this one? Why is that different for you? And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way like I usually do. I mean that in a genuinely information finding out where for you are you getting hung up on that, and then you can take it from there and explore from there.
Thanks.
Mary posted something interesting. She said briefly.
Oh, that was in response to a question. So I don't know if people have time for one more question real quick. Sanda is saying this, her question basically is asking about if someone can share experience about treating obsessions about the afterlife. So I don't know if any of the panelists today would have comments about that. I was just saying, like, really briefly, you could get specific about the primary doubt, and afterlife might be related to consequences of a doubt, but I'd be curious what other people have to say.
I'd say convert to Judaism. It's going to make your life a lot easier.
There is no afterlife in Judaism.
We don't have a hell. We're good to go.
I think it's important to figure out if it's a doubt or
Yeah.
if they want information. And so, you know, that's about, or if there's ambivalence there. So, you know, we need to clear that up.
Don't you find that it's mostly a question about, like, I need to know, like, I need to know what it's like. I need to know if it's there. I need to know if it's real. And those are questions that can't be answered. And if faith is an important part of your life, faith is the essence of that. It's the essence of
The
not
quote that
knowing.
I wrote
Functional
from
certainty.
Scripture, Hebrews, yeah.
So this could be existential or scrupulosity related potentially.
Or
as well.
or it
Yeah.
could be
or just be
the person searching.
normal. Mhm.
Right.
And I want to give a plug. Lucy gave a wonderful presentation a while back, but it's still on YouTube, as far as I remember, on existential OCD.
Yes.
She did a
Excellent.
wonderful presentation, and I would absolutely encourage checking that out for somebody who has
That's
questions.
the beauty of this community. It's so many wonderful people sharing things.
Yeah.
Really great.
And different perspectives,
Yes.
which again goes perfectly with our talk.
It goes
Yes.
perfectly with ICBT. You
Yes.
can apply it across every religion, across any theme. If you take out the content, it can bring a lot of relief to many people.
And again, it's the process that we're focused on. It's not the content of what the doubt is about. It's the process of how did they get to that doubt? What's the inferential confusion around that doubt? And if you can help them recognize they're inferentially confused, the doubt disappears. To quote Stephanie Woodrow, I'm thinking of her lovely little slides on the doubt sequence.
So thank you everyone for participating. Thank you so much for our wonderful presenters. This was a very enlightening presentation. We learned a lot. Thank you for your time and for your generous contribution to this community, and for everyone to attending and participating. So we will see you next week in ICBT Fridays again. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.